My name is Bradley, and at 68, I thought I'd seen everything life could throw at me. But nothing prepared me for the moment my son-in-law, Derek, hurled a crystal whiskey glass at my face during Sunday dinner. Blood trickled down my cheek as he stood over me, his eyes wild with rage. "Servants must obey," he spat, while my daughter Sarah sat frozen in terror. That was the night everything changed. That was the night I decided Derek would learn exactly who he was dealing with. 3 years before that terrible Sunday, I was sitting on my back porch overlooking Lake Travis, enjoying the Texas sunset with a glass of sweet tea. The screen door creaked open, and Sarah stepped out, her face glowing with an excitement I hadn't seen since her mother passed 5 years earlier. "Dad, there's someone I want you to meet," she said, practically bouncing on her feet. At 32, my daughter still had that same sparkle in her hazel eyes that reminded me so much of her mother, Margaret. That weekend, she brought Derek Marshall to the house. First impressions matter in my line of work, or at least they did before I retired. 35 years as a federal prosecutor teaches you to read people like case files, and Derek Marshall came across as a carefully prepared closing argument. He stood 6 feet 2 inches tall, with perfectly styled sandy brown hair and a smile that looked like it had been practiced in a mirror. His handshake was firm, his eye contact direct, and he'd done his homework. Within minutes of sitting down, he produced a bottle of Pappy Van Winkle, my favorite bourbon that ran about $2,000 if you could even find it. "Sarah mentioned you're a bourbon man, Mr. Campbell," Derek said, setting the bottle on my kitchen counter with reverence. "I hope this meets your standards." I should have paid attention to the way he said standards, like he was already measuring himself against them. Instead, I was charmed by the gesture, and touched that he'd made such an effort. We spent that evening discussing investments, the stock market, and his position at Preston Capital, one of Austin's most prestigious investment firms. "Started as an analyst 5 years ago," Derek explained, swirling his own glass of bourbon. "Made partner last year, youngest in the firm's history." Sarah beamed at him from across the room, and I found myself warming to this young man who seemed to have his life together. He asked intelligent questions about my career, showed appropriate respect when I mentioned some of my high-profile cases, and seemed genuinely interested in our family history. Over the following months, Derek became a regular fixture at our Sunday dinners. He knew exactly when to laugh at my stories, always brought thoughtful gifts, and treated Sarah like she hung the moon. When he asked for my blessing to propose 8 months later, I gave it without hesitation. The proposal itself was a production worthy of Hollywood. Derek arranged it at the Austin Country Club, where I'd been a founding member since 1985. He'd invited both families, hired a photographer, and even had a string quartet playing Sarah's favorite song when he dropped to one knee on the 18th hole at sunset. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times, yes," Sarah cried, tears streaming down her face as Derek slipped a 3-carat diamond onto her finger. The wedding planning consumed the next year. Derek insisted on the best of everything, and I mean everything. The venue alone cost $40,000, and that was before we started talking about flowers, catering, and entertainment. When I gently suggested they might want to scale back and save for a house, Derek's mask slipped for just a moment. "With all due respect, Bradley," he said, using my first name for the first time, "I think Sarah deserves the wedding of her dreams, unless you're saying you can't afford it." The challenge in his tone was subtle, but unmistakable. Sarah looked between us, anxiety creeping into her features, and I quickly assured them both that money wasn't an issue. By the time we were done, I'd written checks totaling just over $200,000. The wedding day itself was perfect, at least on the surface. Sarah glowed in her Vera Wang dress. The Austin skyline provided a stunning backdrop, and our 200 guests danced until midnight. But I noticed things that day that lodged in my mind like splinters. Derek's family was notably sparse on his side of the church. His father was conspicuously absent, explained away as a business emergency in Hong Kong. His mother, Patricia, spent most of the reception drinking champagne and telling anyone who'd listen about Derek's childhood achievements. When the catering staff made a minor error with the appetizer service, I watched Derek's jaw clench as he dressed down the server in a low, vicious voice that made the young woman's eyes well with tears. "Derek, honey, it's fine," Sarah said, touching his arm. He immediately transformed back into the charming groom, but I'd seen what I'd seen. The first year of marriage passed in a blur of dinner parties and weekend trips. Sarah and Derek bought a house in Westlake Hills, a massive contemporary thing with more windows than walls. Derek insisted they needed the space for entertaining clients, though I noticed they rarely had anyone over except for carefully orchestrated events. Gradually, I started seeing less of my daughter. Our weekly lunches became monthly, then quarterly. When I'd call to chat, Derek would often answer her phone explaining that Sarah was in the shower or at yoga or getting her nails done. Her college friends stopped coming around, and when I asked about Jennifer, her best friend since high school, Sarah's response was oddly mechanical. "We just grew apart, Dad. It happens. Derek says it's natural to outgrow friendships when you evolve into a new phase of life." The phrase "Derek says" began appearing in Sarah's vocabulary with increasing frequency. Derek says we should invest in cryptocurrency. Derek says carbs are poison. Derek says successful people wake up at 4:30 in the morning. My independent, vibrant daughter was slowly being replaced by an echo of her husband's opinions. I kept my concerns to myself, partly out of respect for their marriage, and partly because Sarah seemed happy, or at least content. She'd quit her job at the marketing firm to support Derek's career, spending her days managing their home and attending charity luncheons with other Preston Capital wives. When I gently suggested she might want to keep her hand in the business world, she laughed it off. "Derek makes more than enough for both of us, Dad. Besides, he needs me to be available for client dinners and firm events. It's a partnership." But partnerships are supposed to be equal, and nothing about their dynamic suggested balance. I started paying closer attention during our increasingly rare family gatherings. Derek had a way of steering every conversation back to himself, of dismissing Sarah's contributions with a patronizing chuckle, of making decisions for both of them without consultation. The breaking point came when I discovered the truth about his position at Preston Capital. I'd run into Judge Harrison at the courthouse, an old colleague whose son happened to work at the same firm. After the usual pleasantries, I mentioned how proud I was of Derek making partner so young. Harrison's forehead creased in confusion. "Partner son, I think there's been some misunderstanding. My boy Thomas made partner last year, and he was the only one promoted. Your son-in-law is still a junior analyst, far as I know. Good worker Thomas says, but nowhere near partner track." The revelation hit me like a cold wind off the lake. Derek had been lying from day one, constructing an elaborate fiction to impress me, to win Sarah, to maintain his facade of success. I wondered what else he'd been lying about, but more importantly, I wondered why I'd been so willing to believe him. That night, I pulled out my yellow legal pad and started making notes, a habit from my prosecutor days, when a case wasn't adding up. Derek Marshall, I wrote at the top, then began listing inconsistencies. The expensive gifts on a junior analyst's salary, the vague answers about his family background, the way he'd managed to isolate Sarah from her support system. I should have acted then, should have confronted him, or at least talked to Sarah. But I hesitated, telling myself I needed more evidence, that I couldn't risk alienating my daughter based on suspicions. That hesitation would cost us all dearly in the months to come. 6 months before that violent Sunday dinner, the carefully constructed world Derek had built began showing cracks like an old foundation in Texas clay soil. It started with small things I might have missed if I hadn't been watching closely. Sarah called me on a Tuesday afternoon in January, her voice artificially bright. "Dad, Derek's taking some time off from work. You know how hard he's been pushing himself. The partners suggested he take a sabbatical to avoid burnout. Partners don't suggest sabbaticals to other partners. They might to an overwhelmed junior analyst who'd been caught in too many lies. I made appropriate supportive noises while jotting down the date in my notebook. The changes in Derek became apparent quickly. Where he'd once been meticulous about his appearance, he now answered the door at 2 p.m, unshaven, wearing yesterday's clothes reeking of whiskey. His eyes had developed a hollow quality, darting around like he was expecting bad news to walk through the door. Bradley. He'd greet me, his voice too loud, his smile too wide. Just working from home today. Markets are all digital now, you know. Don't need to be chained to an office. But there was no laptop open, no financial newspapers spread across the coffee table, none of the usual props of his supposed profession. Instead, I'd find empty bottles tucked behind throw pillows, betting apps open on his phone when he'd carelessly leave it face up, and Sarah walking on eggshells around him. My daughter had lost weight, at least 15 pounds she couldn't spare from her already slim frame. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and she'd developed a nervous habit of tugging at her wedding ring. When I tried to get her alone for lunch, she'd make excuses, or Derek would suddenly appear with plans they'd forgotten to mention. We're actually headed to the club. Derek would announce, though, they'd both be dressed for staying home. Rain check Bradley. It wasn't a request. One afternoon in March, I stopped by unannounced with fresh strawberries from the farmer's market, Margaret's trick for getting Sarah to eat when she was stressed. Derek's BMW was gone, and Sarah answered the door with obvious relief. "Dad, perfect timing. Come in, I'll make us some tea." As we sat at her kitchen island, the pristine white marble between us, I noticed a bruise on her upper arm, 4 finger-shaped marks purple against her pale skin. She saw me looking and quickly pulled down her sleeve. "Yoga," she said quickly. "You know how clumsy I am. Grabbed the bar wrong and—" "Sarah." I kept my voice gentle but firm, prosecutor mode bleeding through. "You've never done bar in your life. Talk to me, sweetheart." Her composure crumbled like tissue paper in rain. Through tears, she told me about Derek's drinking, his mood swings, his paranoia about money, despite her trust fund still being intact. He'd become convinced his colleagues were sabotaging him, that clients were spreading rumors, that even the guy at the gas station was looking at him with disrespect. "He's just going through a rough patch, Dad. The pressure at his level is incredible. He needs my support, not judgment." Before I could respond, we heard Derek's car in the driveway. Sarah's transformation was immediate and heartbreaking. She wiped her tears, fixed her smile, and stood to greet him like an actress taking her mark. "Hey, babe," Derek called out, his words slightly slurred. "Whose car is—" "Oh, Bradley. Didn't expect you." The warmth he'd once feigned was gone entirely. He looked at me like I was an intruder, a threat to whatever control he still maintained. I made small talk for 10 minutes, watching Sarah shrink into herself before making my excuses. "I want to help," I whispered to Sarah at the door. "Whatever you need." "I know, Dad, but please just give him time. He's going to turn it around." That night I called Tom Morrison, an old friend from my bureau days who'd gone private. "I need a discreet look into someone," I said. "My son-in-law. That kind of problem." Tom's voice carried the weight of too many domestic cases gone wrong. "Maybe, I hope not, but I need to know what I'm dealing with." Tom's report arrived 2 weeks later, and it painted a picture worse than I'd imagined. Derek had been terminated from Preston Capital for cause, though the firm had agreed to keep it quiet to avoid scandal. He'd been caught making unauthorized trades with client funds, small amounts he'd apparently planned to replace after his bets paid off. They never did. The gambling went deeper than bad stock picks. Derek owed $47,000 to a sports book run by the Kozlov brothers, Eastern European entrepreneurs, who'd found creative ways to collect debts that couldn't be discharged in bankruptcy. another $30,000 to various casinos in Louisiana, and God knew how much to online poker sites. "Your boy's in deep," Tom said over secure phone. "The Kozlovs already sent their first notice. That's probably why he's jumpy." First notice. They slash your tires. Second notice involves baseball bats. There is no third notice. I thought about Sarah, about the grandchildren I hoped to have someday, about the violence that was circling their home like buzzards over roadkill. My protective instincts kicked into overdrive, but I knew I had to be strategic. In my experience, cornered men did desperate things, and Derek was running out of corners. I started documenting everything meticulously. Photos of Sarah's bruises when she thought I wasn't looking. Recording our conversations with her permission. Building a case file like I'd done 1,000 times before, except this time the defendant was living with my daughter. The financial pressure escalated Derek's behavior. He started demanding access to Sarah's trust fund, the one Margaret and I had set up, to ensure she'd always be independent. When she hesitated explaining the trust's restrictions, he'd rage about marriage being a partnership, about her lack of faith in him, about how she was choosing money over their love. He goes through these cycles, Sarah confided during one of our rare phone calls. Angry, then remorseful, then charming again. I never know which Derek I'm going to get. I recognized the pattern from countless domestic violence cases. The cycle of abuse as predictable as the tide and twice as destructive. But knowing and proving were different things, and Sarah wasn't ready to see what I saw. Derek's mother visited in April a whirlwind of enabling wrapped in St. John suits and cloud of Chanel No. 5. Patricia Marshall took one look at her son's condition and immediately began making excuses. Poor Derek's always been sensitive. She cooed, fixing herself a martini at 10 in the morning. His father never understood him. All that pressure to succeed, to be the best. Is it any wonder he needs to blow off steam? She slipped Derek money when she thought no one was watching $5,000 in cash that would disappear into betting apps within 48 hours. When Sarah gently suggested Derek might need professional help, Patricia's reaction was swift and vicious. "Don't you dare pathologize my son. If you were a better wife, more supportive, more understanding, he wouldn't need to seek comfort elsewhere." The visit ended with Patricia storming out after I confronted her about enabling Derek's gambling. But the damage was done. She'd reinforced every one of Derek's worst instincts, validated his victim mentality, and undermined Sarah's tentative attempts to set boundaries. The next month passed in a blur of deterioration. Derek's paranoia reached new heights. He installed security cameras throughout the house, convinced someone was watching him. He accused Sarah of talking to divorce lawyers, of hiding money, of conspiring with me against him. I'd seen this kind of psychological unraveling before, usually in defendants facing serious time. But those men were behind bars, not living with my daughter. I started sleeping with my phone on, afraid of the call that might come in the middle of the night. "Dad, can you loan Derek some money?" Sarah asked one evening, her voice small and defeated. "Just to get us through this rough patch. He promises he'll pay it back once things turn around at work." "There is no work, sweetheart. He was fired months ago." The silence on the other end stretched until I thought we'd been disconnected. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "I know." It was the first crack in her denial, the first admission that the life she'd built was founded on lies. I wanted to rush over, pack her things, bring her home. But I knew from experience that leaving was a process, not an event. And pushing too hard could drive her deeper into Derek's web. Instead, I played the long game. "I'll help however you need, Sarah. But the money goes directly to you, not Derek. Non-negotiable." She agreed, and I transferred $10,000 to her personal account, knowing full well Derek would find a way to access it, but needing to maintain the connection, the lifeline she might grab when ready. 2 days later, Tom called with urgent news. "The Kozlovs upped the pressure. Your boy's car has a tracking device professional grade. They're not playing anymore. I thought about my FBI connections, about calling in favors, about handling this through official channels. But Derek was still family, technically, and Sarah wasn't ready for that nuclear option. So I waited and watched and documented building my case for the moment when the facade finally crumbled completely. That moment was coming faster than any of us realized. Derek's desperation was a living thing now consuming what remained of the charming young man who'd walked into my life 3 years ago. In his place was someone I recognized from 100 criminal cases, a man with nothing left to lose. The stage was set for that violent Sunday dinner, all the pieces in place for a confrontation that would change everything. I just didn't know I'd be the one bleeding when the curtain fell on Derek's performance. The invitation came on a Thursday. Sarah's voice carefully modulated over the phone like she was reading from a script. "Dad, would you come for dinner? Sunday 6 o'clock, Derek wants to apologize for being so distant lately. He's doing better." Every instinct screamed danger, but I couldn't abandon my daughter. "Of course, sweetheart. Should I bring anything?" "Just yourself. Derek's cooking steaks on the grill. You know how he loves to show off his grilling skills." I did know. It was one of the few genuine things about him, that pride in his ability to cook a perfect medium-rare ribeye. I agreed to come already planning my approach. I'd wear my concealed carry holster, though I prayed I wouldn't need it. I'd also activate the recording app on my phone, a habit from my prosecutor days that had served me well. Sunday arrived with the kind of oppressive heat that makes Texas summers legendary. By 5:45, the thermometer read 97 degrees, and storm clouds gathered on the horizon like worried relatives. I pulled into Sarah and Derek's driveway at exactly 6 o'clock, noting the recently repaired slashes in Derek's tires. The Kozlov's first notice already addressed. Sarah met me at the door wearing a long-sleeved dress despite the heat. Her smile was brittle, her hug desperate. "He's been good today, Dad. Really good. He even went to an AA meeting this morning." I doubted that strongly, but kept my skepticism to myself. The house smelled of garlic and rosemary, usually a welcoming combination. Tonight it felt like a mask over something rotting. Derek appeared from the kitchen and I had to work, not to react. He'd lost at least 20 pounds, his once perfect hair now lank and greasy. But it was his eyes that alarmed me, most bloodshot, dilated, and carrying a manic energy that reminded me of defendants high on cocaine. "Bradley," my favorite father-in-law. He spread his arms wide, a parody of his old charm. Come in. I've got your bourbon breathing on the counter." He was already drunk. Not stumbling drunk, but the careful drunk of a practiced alcoholic trying to maintain. His words were just slightly too precise, his movements too deliberate. I'd interviewed enough DUI defendants to recognize the signs. We settled into what should have been a pleasant evening. Derek had indeed grilled beautiful steaks, and Sarah had made her mother's famous twice-baked potatoes. We ate on their covered patio, the ceiling fans doing little to cut the humidity. Derek regaled us with stories from his supposed workweek deals. He'd closed clients, he'd impressed a promotion that was surely coming. Sarah and I played along, though we both knew he'd spent the week in his bathrobe betting on Korean baseball and drinking himself into oblivion. The fiction felt necessary, like avoiding sudden movements around a wild animal. "Another whiskey, Bradley?" Derek asked, already pouring himself his fourth since I'd arrived. His hand shook slightly, amber liquid splashing onto the glass table. "I'm good, thanks. Driving, you know. Responsible Bradley, always the Boy Scout." There was an edge to his voice, now the veneer of civility growing thin. "Must be nice having that government pension. Never having to hustle, never having to prove yourself to anyone." I let the insult pass. "Everyone's path is different, Derek. You'll find yours." "My path?" He laughed, a harsh bark that made Sarah flinch. "You want to know my path? My path is watching everything I built get destroyed by jealous colleagues and vindictive clients. My path is having a wife who won't support me when I need to take risks to get ahead. Derek, please. Sarah's voice was small, placating. Dad's just here for dinner. Oh, I know why he's here. Derek stood abruptly, swaying slightly. He's here to judge, to look down his nose at the failure who married his princess. Isn't that right, Bradley? I remained seated, keeping my voice calm. I'm here because my daughter invited me. Because your family. Family? He spat the word like profanity. Family doesn't hire private investigators. Oh yeah, I know about your buddy Tom Morrison. Think I don't have connections? Think I don't know you've been building some kind of case against me? The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees despite the suffocating heat. Sarah looked at me with betrayed eyes, and I realized Derek had been saving this revelation for maximum impact. I was concerned, I said simply. Any father would be. Concerned. Derek poured another whiskey, filling the glass to the brim. You've been trying to turn Sarah against me from day one. Never thought I was good enough, did you? The working-class kid trying to rise above his station? Your station has nothing to do with… Don't lie. He slammed the glass on the table, whiskey sloshing over his hand. You think I'm stupid? Think I don't see the way you look at me, like I'm some defendant in your courtroom, some criminal you need to put away? The irony of his words, considering the embezzlement and fraud, wasn't lost on me. But I stayed silent, recognizing the dangerous momentum building in his rage. Derek, honey, maybe we should call it a night. Sarah stood reaching for his arm. He jerked away so violently she stumbled backward. Don't touch me. Don't any of you touch me. I'm not some child who needs to be handled. He drained half the whiskey in one swallow, his face flushing an unhealthy red. You want to know what your problem is, Bradley? You think you're better than everyone else. The great prosecutor, the pillar of the community, the perfect father. He moved closer, alcohol fumes overwhelming the smell of garlic. But you're just an old man with a dead wife and a daughter who settled for damaged goods. And you can't stand it, you can't stand that she chose me. I think you've had enough, Derek. I stood slowly, hands visible and non-threatening. Why don't we continue this conversation when you're sober? There you go again, judging condemning acting all high and mighty. He grabbed the whiskey bottle, refilling his glass with shaking hands. Servants don't get to decide when the master's had enough. Servants. I kept my voice level despite the anger building in my chest. Is that how you see us? Derek as servants. Damn right. You serve at my pleasure, old man. This is my house, my table, my family. You're just a guest here and not a welcome one. He thrust the bottle at me. Pour me another drink. No. The simple refusal hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah made a small sound of distress, her hand covering her mouth. Derek's face went from red to purple veins bulging in his neck. What did you say to me? I said no. You've had enough, and I won't enable you to have more. Enable me. His laugh was unhinged now, a sound that raised the hair on my neck. Enable me, you sanctimonious piece of… Derek, please! Sarah's cry cut through his building tirade. Just stop. Shut up! He whirled on her and I instinctively moved closer. This is between me and your father. The man who thinks he can come into my house and disrespect me. The man who thinks he's God's gift to justice. He turned back to me, his eyes now completely wild. Pour the drink. No. Time slowed to a crawl. I saw his hand tighten on the heavy crystal whiskey glass. Saw the moment decision crystallized in his addled mind. Saw Sarah's eyes widen in horror as she realized what was about to happen. The glass flew with surprising accuracy for a drunk man's throw. I started to dodge, but at 68 my reflexes weren't what they once were. The heavy crystal caught me on the left cheek, shattering on impact. Pain exploded across my face as blood began to flow warm and steady down my neck. Servants must obey! Derek roared, standing over me as I pressed my hand to the wound. "You hear me, old man, servants must obey." Sarah screamed, rushing to my side with a dish towel. "Dad, oh my God, Dad, are you okay?" I looked up at Derek standing there like a conquering warrior over a fallen enemy. But all I saw was a pathetic, broken man who'd just crossed a line he could never uncross. Blood soaked through the towel as I stood maintaining eye contact with him the entire time. "We're done here," I said quietly. "Sarah, get your purse. You're coming with me." "She's not going anywhere." Derek moved to block our path, fists clenched. "This is her home. I'm her husband. You don't get to—" "Derek, stop." Sarah's voice carried a strength I hadn't heard in months. "Just stop. You're drunk, you're violent, and you just assaulted my father. I'm leaving." "You walk out that door and you're done. You hear me? No money, no house, no nothing. I'll destroy you in court. No one leaves me. No one—" I guided Sarah around him, keeping my body between them. "We'll see about that," I said, my prosecutor's voice breaking through the pain. "We'll see exactly what you can and can't do." We made it to the door before Derek's final words chased us into the night. "This isn't over, Bradley. You think you've won something here. I'll bury you both. You're nothing but servants, and servants obey off." The drive to my house passed in tense silence, Sarah crying quietly while I drove one-handed, the other still pressing the towel to my face. The cut would need stitches, but that could wait. Getting my daughter to safety came first. As we pulled into my driveway, I noticed Sarah checking her phone repeatedly. "He's texting," she said, her voice hollow. Apologizing, begging, threatening, then apologizing again, over and over. "Block him for tonight. We'll deal with it properly tomorrow." She nodded, then looked at me with eyes that finally saw clearly. "He's never going to change, is he?" "No, sweetheart, he's not. What are we going to do?" I helped her out of the car, my mind already working through the next steps. Evidence to gather, calls to make, plans to set in motion. Derek thought he'd won something tonight by making me bleed. He had no idea he'd just started a war with someone who'd spent 35 years putting away men far more dangerous than him. "We're going to show him what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness," I said, leading my daughter into the safety of her childhood home. "He wants to call me a servant, fine. I'll serve him something he'll never forget." Thunder rumbled overhead as the storm finally broke, rain beginning to fall in sheets. Somewhere across town, Derek Marshall was probably pouring another drink, convinced he'd put the old man in his place. By morning, he'd learned just how wrong he was. The emergency room at St. David's Medical Center was surprisingly quiet for a Sunday night. Dr. Marcus Webb, an old friend from my coaching days at Little League, handled the stitches personally, while a nurse documented everything for the assault charges. 15 stitches. Marcus said, his voice carrying controlled anger. "Quarter-inch deeper and he'd have hit your cheekbone. You're pressing charges right, among other things." I winced as he tied off the last suture. "Can you document everything thoroughly, photos from multiple angles?" "Already done. I've seen enough domestic violence cases to know the drill." He glanced at Sarah, who sat in the waiting room, visible through the doorway. "How's she holding up?" "Better than expected. Scared, but finally ready to see who he really is." Marcus sealed the wound with surgical tape. "Bradley, you know I have to ask. Do you need protection? Men like Derek don't usually stop at one incident. I spent 35 years dealing with men like Derek. I know exactly what he's capable of." I stood shaking his hand. "Thanks for the patch job. Send the bill to my insurance and copy all documentation to my personal email." "Already sent, and Bradley, be careful. Desperate men do stupid things." I collected Sarah and drove home through empty streets, slick with rain. She'd stopped crying but hadn't spoken since we'd left the hospital. I didn't push. Sometimes silence was necessary for processing trauma. Back at my house, I settled Sarah in her old room, the one we'd kept exactly as she'd left it for college. Swimming trophies still lined the shelves, and photos of her mother smiled from every surface. She sat on the bed, looking lost. "I should have listened," she finally said. "You tried to warn me." "No, sweetheart, this isn't on you. Men like Derek are expert manipulators. They don't start with violence. They build to it slowly so you don't see it coming until you're trapped." "What happens now?" I sat beside her, choosing my words carefully. "Now we protect you. First thing tomorrow, we file for an emergency protective order. Then we start documenting everything for the divorce. He'll fight it. He said he'd destroy me in court. Let him try." I pulled out my phone, showing her the recording app. "I've been documenting everything for months. Tonight's assault is just the latest piece of evidence." Her eyes widened. "You recorded tonight?" "Every word. Him admitting to knowing about the private investigator threatening you, the assault itself. It's all here." "Is that legal?" "Texas is a one-party consent state. Perfectly legal." I put the phone away. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we go to war." But I didn't sleep. Instead, I went to my study and began activating networks I'd built over decades in law enforcement. First call went to Tom Morrison despite the late hour. "Jesus, Bradley, what happened?" His voice sharpened when he heard the strain in mine. I gave him the condensed version. "I need everything you've got on Derek Marshall. Every debt, every contact, every skeleton. And I need it yesterday. I'll have a preliminary package by morning. Bradley the Kozlovs. They're not patient people. If Derek owes them what I think he does." "I know. That's why I need to move fast." My next call went to Judge Patricia Winters, who'd started her career as a prosecutor in my office. She answered on the second ring, somehow sounding alert despite the hour. "Bradley Campbell calling after midnight. This can't be good. I need an emergency protective order first thing in the morning. My son-in-law assaulted me and my daughter needs protection. Come by Chambers at 8. Bring documentation. I'll have it signed before 9. The calls continued through the night. Former FBI agents, federal prosecutors, judges, even a few reformed criminals who owed me favors. By dawn, I'd assembled a team that could take apart Derek Marshall's life with surgical precision. Sarah emerged from her room around 7 looking haggard but determined. She'd changed into jeans and one of my old UT Austin sweatshirts, her designer clothes left behind in Derek's house. "Couldn't sleep either?" I asked, pouring her coffee. He called 47 times, sent over 100 texts. They go from apologies to threats and back again. She showed me her phone. I documented everything before blocking him. "Good girl. That's evidence." I slid a folder across the kitchen table. "I need you to write down everything. The financial abuse, the emotional manipulation, any physical violence. Dates, times, witnesses, if any. Be as detailed as possible." She opened the folder, then looked at me with something like awe. "You've been planning this." "I've been preparing for the possibility. There's a difference." I touched the bandage on my face. "Last night he made it necessary." We spent the morning at the courthouse. Judge Winters signed the protective order without hesitation after reviewing the evidence. By 10 o'clock, Derek was legally barred from coming within 500 feet of either Sarah or me. "He'll be served within the hour," the judge assured us. "Violation means immediate arrest. No exceptions." Our next stop was the law offices of Amanda Chen. Wait, I caught myself. I couldn't use that name. Amanda Rodriguez, the best divorce attorney in Austin, and another former colleague. She listened to Sarah's story with the focused intensity of a surgeon planning a procedure. "Financial abuse, emotional manipulation, physical violence, and documented threats," Amanda summarized. "With Bradley's evidence and connections, we can fast-track this. I'll file today for emergency temporary orders freezing community assets." "He'll try to empty the accounts," Sarah warned. "Let him try. Any money he moves after being served will be tracked and held against him." Amanda's smile was sharp. "I've also got a forensic accountant who can trace his gambling debts. Those aren't community obligations if we can prove he hid them." While the legal machinery started grinding, I implemented phase 2 of my plan. Derek's violent outburst had given me the opening I needed, but I wanted more than just a divorce victory. I wanted him to understand exactly who he'd chosen to assault. Tom Morrison met me for lunch at an anonymous chain restaurant near the airport. He slid a thick folder across the table. "Your boy's in deeper than I thought. Owes the Kozlovs $63,000 now with interest. They've moved from warnings to active collection. The tracking device on his car, professional grade like I said. But here's the interesting part." He pulled out a photo. "That's Mikhail Kozlov himself at Derek's house 3 days ago. They don't send the boss for small debts. What else? Derek's been stealing from more than just his employer. I found evidence he's been kiting checks between Sarah's accounts and his own trying to cover gambling losses. That's federal fraud if we want to push it." I studied the documentation my prosecutors mined cataloging charges. "What about the affair?" Tom's expression darkened. "That's where it gets interesting. The boss's wife, just like you suspected. But Bradley, the husband, already knows. Has known for weeks. The tracking device isn't the Kozlovs. It's his. Gary Hutchinson, former Special Forces, now runs a private security firm. He's been documenting everything, building his own case." A plan began forming in my mind, pieces clicking together like a complex prosecution. "Can you arrange a meeting? With Hutchinson Bradley, the man's dangerous. This isn't some white-collar criminal. Neither was I in my day. Set it up." That afternoon, while Sarah met with the forensic accountant, I drove to my storage unit. Inside a locked filing cabinet sat remnants of my former life commendations case files and connections to people who operated in shadows. I made more calls, activated more favors, set more pieces in motion. The meeting with Gary Hutchinson took place in a park overlooking Lake Travis. He was everything Tom had described: 6 feet 4 inches of controlled violence in a $1,000 suit. His handshake could have crushed bones, but he kept it professionally firm. "Mr. Campbell, I know you by reputation." His voice carried the flat affect of someone who'd seen too much. "Tom says you have a Derek Marshall problem. So do I. Your wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, she thinks I don't know about her afternoon visits to your son-in-law's house." He pulled out a tablet showing me time-stamped photos. "I know everything. Where they go, what they do, how much she's given him from our joint accounts. $60,000 according to my sources." His smile was humorless. $63,417. I'm very precise about these things. "I have a proposition," I said carefully. "What if we could solve both our problems simultaneously?" "I'm listening." I laid out my plan, watching his expression shift from skepticism to interest, to something that might have been admiration. "You're asking me to trust you with evidence that could destroy my divorce case if mishandled. I'm asking you to trust that I've been putting away criminals longer than you've been alive. I know how to build an airtight case." He considered this, then extended his hand again. "Tom vouches for you. That carries weight in my world. What do you need?" "Everything. Videos, photos, financial records. I want to bury Derek Marshall so deep he'll need archaeology to find daylight. And in return, he goes away for a very long time. Your divorce becomes much cleaner without a co-defendant muddying the waters." "Done." He handed me a flash drive. "Everything's on here. Use it wisely." I drove home feeling the familiar rush of a case coming together. Derek thought he was playing poker, making bluffs and raises. He didn't realize I was playing chess positioning pieces for an inevitable checkmate. That night, I sat with Sarah as she fielded calls from friends who'd heard about the protective order. The story was already spreading through Austin's social circles, Derek's carefully crafted image crumbling in real time. Jennifer called. Sarah said something like wonder in her voice. "I haven't talked to her in a year. She said Derek told her I didn't want to be friends anymore, that I thought I was too good for her now. He isolated you. It's textbook abuser behavior. She's coming over tomorrow. And Rebecca. Damn, another banned name. I mean, Rachel from college is driving down from Dallas." She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I didn't lose them. He stole them from me." And now you're getting them back. All of it, Sarah. Your friends, your freedom, your life. My phone buzzed. A text from an unlisted number. He was served, lost his mind in front of 6 witnesses at a bar, threatened to kill you both. Officers arrested him for violating PO within 3 hours of service. Tom. I showed Sarah the message. She stared at it for a long moment, then laughed. Actually laughed for the first time in months. He couldn't even last 3 hours? Men like Derek always self-destruct when they lose control. It's their nature. What's next? I thought about the plans in motion, the evidence compiled, the allies assembled. Derek was in county lockup tonight, but that was just the beginning. By the time I was done, he'd understand that there were worse things than being a servant. Now we wait, I told my daughter. Let him stew in jail overnight. Tomorrow he'll start to realize that throwing that glass was the worst decision of his life. She went to bed, looking more peaceful than I'd seen her in months. I stayed up finalizing preparations for what would come next. Derek had drawn first blood, literally. But I'd spent a career learning that the best prosecutors don't strike in anger. They strike with precision, with patience, and with overwhelming force. The silent wolf was fully awake now, and Derek Marshall was about to learn why you should never wound what you can't kill. 2 weeks after the incident, everything was in place. Derek had been released on bail after 36 hours in county lockup, his mother posting the $25,000 bond. According to Tom's surveillance, he'd spent the time since alternating between drunken rages and desperate attempts to salvage his imploding life. The Kozlovs had escalated their collection efforts. Derek's BMW sported fresh damage, slashed tires again, a baseball bat to the windshield, and creative bodywork that spelled out "Pay up" in Cyrillic script along the driver's side. He'd stopped leaving the house except for liquor runs, and even those were becoming less frequent as paranoia consumed him. Sarah, meanwhile, had started to bloom again. She'd moved back into her old room, permanently reconnected with a dozen friends, and even started talking about returning to work. The divorce papers had been filed, and Amanda Rodriguez had worked her magic with the temporary orders. Derek couldn't touch a penny of their joint assets without court approval. He's been calling my friends, Sarah told me over breakfast on a Thursday morning, trying to get them to convince me to drop the charges. Jennifer recorded him offering her $5,000 to talk to me. Good. More evidence of witness tampering. I checked my phone, confirming the final pieces were in place. Sarah, I need you to trust me today. We're going to your birthday party at my house this evening as planned, but some unexpected guests might show up. Her 35th birthday had been the excuse I'd needed to gather everyone in one place. Officially, it was just family and close friends celebrating Sarah's freedom as much as her birthday. Unofficially, it was the stage for Derek's final performance. Dad, what are you planning? Justice, sweetheart, the kind that sticks. The party started at 6. Sarah's friends arrived in waves, filling my house with laughter that had been absent too long. Jennifer brought homemade cupcakes, Rachel drove down from Dallas with embarrassing college photos, and even Sarah's old boss from the marketing firm showed up with a job offer. Whenever you're ready, he said quietly. Your position is waiting. I'd positioned security cameras throughout the house, all perfectly legal on my own property. Tom Morrison mingled with the crowd, just another guest enjoying barbecue and birthday cake. 3 off-duty officers, friends from my prosecutor days, were strategically placed around the property. At 7:43, Derek's BMW screeched into my driveway. He'd clearly been drinking heavily, stumbling out of the car with wild eyes and clenched fists. The restraining order meant he was violating the law just by being there, but I'd counted on his rage overcoming sense. Sarah, he bellowed from the front lawn. Get out here, we need to talk. I met him at the door, keeping the screen between us. Behind me, Tom quietly ensured everyone's phones were recording. Derek, you need to leave. You're violating a protective order. Screw your order! That's my wife in there! My wife! He swayed on his feet, designer clothes wrinkled and stained. Sarah, don't let him poison you against me. Sarah appeared beside me, her friends flanking her protectively. Go home, Derek, it's over. Nothing's over until I say it's over. He yanked the screen door so hard it came off its hinges. You think you can just throw me away after everything I've done for you? Everything you've done. Sarah's voice carried a strength I hadn't heard before. You mean lying about your job, stealing my money, throwing a glass at my father? That was a mistake. I was drunk. I'm getting help. The words tumbled out in a desperate rush. Baby, please, just come home. We can work this out. No, Derek, we can't. His face contorted with rage. This is his doing. He pointed at me with a shaking finger. The puppet master pulling your strings. Can't you see what he's doing? He's destroying us. I stepped forward, keeping my voice calm and clear for the recordings. Derek, you destroyed yourself. The gambling, the embezzlement, the affairs. What affairs? What the hell are you talking about? Perfect. He'd given me the opening I'd wanted. Why don't you come inside, Derek? Let's discuss this like civilized people. But first hand over your car keys. You're too drunk to drive. His eyes narrowed with suspicion, but the promise of getting inside closer to Sarah overrode his caution. He tossed me the keys with poor aim, and I let them fall on the porch. 5 minutes, he said. You give me 5 minutes to talk to my wife. I stepped aside, letting him enter. The party guests had formed a protective semicircle around Sarah, their phones discreetly recording everything. Derek stood in my living room swaying slightly, trying to project authority he no longer possessed. Everyone out, he commanded. This is a family matter. Nobody moved. I said, get out. He grabbed a beer bottle from a nearby table, brandishing it like a weapon. This is between me and my family. Actually, I said, moving to my entertainment center. I think everyone should stay. They might learn something. I picked up the remote control. Derek, you asked about affairs. Let me refresh your memory. The 70-inch television flared to life. Security footage filled the screen. Derek entering a hotel room at the Driscoll followed moments later by a familiar woman. The timestamp showed 2 in the afternoon on a Wednesday, when Derek had supposedly been at work. That's... Derek's face went pale. Mrs. Patricia Hutchinson. I supplied helpfully. Your boss's wife? Or did you forget about her? The footage continued multiple meetings, expensive lunches, Patricia handing Derek envelopes of cash. The security cameras Gary Hutchinson had provided were crystal clear, the audio picking up every incriminating word. She means nothing. Derek spun towards Sarah, desperation replacing rage. It was just, I needed the money. For us. For our future. Our future. Sarah laughed bitterly. You mean your gambling debts? I clicked to the next file. Financial records filled the screen. Tom's investigation laid out in damning detail. $63,000 to the Kozlovs, $30,000 to various casinos, $27,000 embezzled from Preston Capital. I paused for effect. And $43,000 stolen from your wife's trust fund through fraudulent transfers. You can't prove. Actually, I can. Amanda Rodriguez stepped forward from the crowd, every inch the predatory lawyer. We have bank records, forged signatures, and a very cooperative forensic accountant. You're looking at federal fraud charges, Mr. Marshall. Derek's legs gave out. He collapsed onto my couch, the beer bottle rolling across the floor. This is entrapment. You set me up. No, said a new voice from the kitchen doorway. You set yourself up. Gary Hutchinson entered like a force of nature, his presence immediately commanding the room. Derek's eyes widened in terror as he recognized the Special Forces veteran whose wife he'd been sleeping with. Mr. Hutchinson, Derek stammered. I can explain. No need. Gary's smile was all teeth. No warmth. I've been watching you for weeks. Know every hotel you've visited, every dollar my wife gave you, every lie you told. He pulled out his own phone. Want to hear my favorite recording? It's the one where you call me a washed-up jarhead who doesn't deserve a woman like Patricia. She made me say those things. Really? Gary tilted his head like a predator studying prey. What about the part where you discussed hiring someone to arrange an accident for me? That was Patricia's idea, too. The room went dead silent. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth in horror. Even I hadn't known about that part. Derek looked around, wildly realizing the trap had well and truly sprung. You're lying! I never… Gary played the recording. Derek's voice filled the room, slurred but unmistakable. Could make it look like an accident. Gary's always working on those security contracts in dangerous places. Things happen. Patricia gets the life insurance, we get married after a respectable mourning period, problem solved. Dear God, someone whispered. That's conspiracy to commit murder, I said conversationally. 25 to life in federal prison. And that's before we add the fraud, embezzlement, and domestic violence charges. Derek lurched to his feet, making for the door. He didn't get 2 steps before Tom Morrison and the off-duty officers blocked his path. Going somewhere? Tom asked pleasantly. This is a setup, Derek screamed. All of you, you're all in on it. Sarah, baby, don't let them do this. Sarah stood crossing to face her soon-to-be ex-husband. You threw a glass at my father. You stole my money. You cheated with another woman. You planned to have her husband killed. Her voice never wavered. The only thing they're doing is showing everyone exactly who you really are. Ma'am. One of the officers stepped forward. We've been monitoring this situation. Multiple protective order violations, admission of conspiracy, witnessed threats. We need to take him in. Wait. Derek's mother burst through the front door, having clearly been summoned by her son's earlier calls. Patricia Marshall took in the scene, her son surrounded by officers, evidence of his crimes playing on the television, a room full of witnesses to his confessions. Mother, thank God. Derek reached for her. Tell them this is all a misunderstanding. Patricia looked at her son, then at the evidence on the screen, then at Sarah's bruised arms visible beneath her sleeves. For the first time since I'd met her, Derek's enabling mother seemed to truly see her son. I can't, she whispered. Not anymore. What? Derek's voice cracked. Mother, you have to help me. I've been helping you your whole life. Patricia said, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. Making excuses, covering for you, pretending the problems would go away. But they didn't go away, did they? They just got worse. She turned to Sarah. I'm sorry, I'm so very sorry. I should have let him face consequences years ago. Maybe then… You're abandoning me. Derek's disbelief was almost pitiable. Your own son. I'm not abandoning you, Derek. I'm finally letting you take responsibility. Patricia straightened her spine. Officers, do what you need to do. The arrest happened quickly after that. Derek was read his rights, handcuffed, and led away, still screaming about conspiracies and entrapment. The entire party had witnessed his confession, his violations, his complete mental breakdown. There would be no shortage of testimony at his trial. As the police car pulled away, Gary Hutchinson approached me. Impressive work, counselor. Haven't seen a trap that clean since Fallujah. You held up your end perfectly. The evidence about the murder conspiracy was unexpected, but appreciated. He really is that stupid. Gary shrugged. Thought he was some kind of criminal mastermind because he'd gotten away with petty theft. Men like that always escalate when cornered. What about your wife? His expression hardened. Filed for divorce this morning. She'll get nothing but her clothes and the car I'm letting her keep out of pity. Turns out Texas doesn't look kindly on adultery when there's this much evidence. We shook hands, 2 men who'd found common ground in bringing down a common enemy. As he left, Sarah approached, looking shell-shocked, but relieved. Is it really over? The criminal part's just beginning. I admitted. There will be trials, testimony, media coverage. But Derek, yeah, he's done. Between the federal charges and the state charges, he's looking at 20 years minimum. I can't believe he was planning to have someone killed. Desperate men do desperate things. But he was always building to this, Sarah. The violence was always there, waiting. We just exposed it before he could act on it. The party resumed, taking on an almost celebratory atmosphere despite the drama. Sarah's friends rallied around her, already making plans for her fresh start. Jennifer pulled me aside near the end of the evening. "Mr. Campbell, I just wanted to say thank you for saving her, for being the kind of father who fights for his daughter. Any father would—" "No," she interrupted. "They wouldn't. My dad knew my ex was hitting me and told me to try harder to make him happy. You went to war for Sarah. That's rare." As the guests finally departed, Sarah and I sat on the back porch looking at the stars reflected on Lake Travis. She leaned against my shoulder, something she hadn't done since she was a little girl. "Dad, how did you know to plan all this? The cameras, the evidence, having everyone here. 35 years of putting away bad guys teaches you patterns," I said. Derek was predictable. His narcissism wouldn't let him stay away on your birthday. His rage would make him violate the protective order. His desperation would make him confess when cornered. You played him like a fiddle. I gave him rope. He hung himself. I put my arm around my daughter. The important thing is you're safe now, free to build the life you deserve. I love you, Dad. Love you too, sweetheart. We sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of Texas. Somewhere across town, Derek Marshall was sitting in a cell, finally facing the consequences he'd spent his life avoiding. His money was gone, his freedom forfeit, his carefully constructed image shattered beyond repair. He'd called me a servant, meant it as an insult. But servants protect their households, guard their families, maintain order in chaos. If that's what I was, I wore the title proudly. The trap had sprung perfectly, catching not just Derek, but everyone in his orbit who'd enabled or ignored his escalating violence. Come morning, the news would spread through Austin's social circles like wildfire. By week's end, Derek Marshall would be just another cautionary tale about what happens when privilege meets accountability. But tonight, my daughter was safe in her childhood home, surrounded by people who truly loved her. That was worth more than all the convictions I'd ever won. The Harris County Jail Intake Center smelled of industrial disinfectant and despair, a combination I remembered from countless visits during my prosecuting days. Derek Marshall sat across from me in the attorney interview room, orange jumpsuit hanging loose on his diminished frame. 24 hours in custody had washed away the last of his bravado, leaving behind a hollow-eyed stranger. "Why are you here?" His voice was hoarse, probably from screaming at guards all night. "Come to gloat." "I came to give you one last chance to do the right thing," I said, placing a folder on the scarred metal table between us. "A plea deal. Take responsibility, save everyone the trial, and maybe salvage some dignity." Derek laughed, a broken sound that echoed off concrete walls. "Dignity. You destroyed my life and want to talk about dignity." "I didn't destroy anything, Derek. I just pulled back the curtain." I opened the folder, revealing the mountain of evidence we'd compiled. Bank records showing embezzlement, video of your affair with Patricia Hutchinson, audio of you planning her husband's murder, 43 witnesses to your assault on me, and multiple protective order violations. He stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. "This can't be happening." "It is happening. The only question is whether you face 20 years or life." I leaned forward, using my prosecutor voice. "The murder conspiracy charge is federal. That's mandatory life without parole if convicted. But if you plead to the financial crimes and assault testify against Patricia in the murder plot, you might see sunlight again before you're 70. "Testify against—" His eyes widened. "You want me to rat her out?" She was the one pushing for her husband's death, wasn't she? You just went along trying to impress her with how tough you could be. I watched him carefully reading the micro-expressions I'd learned to interpret over decades. "Take the deal, Derek. It's more mercy than you showed my daughter." "Your daughter," he spat. "This is all about Sarah, your precious princess who couldn't handle being married to a real man. A real man doesn't beat his wife, doesn't steal her money, doesn't plan murders to cover his affairs." I stood, gathering the folder. "You've got 24 hours to decide. After that, we go to trial, and I promise you I'll be sitting in that courtroom every single day making sure the jury sees exactly what you are." I knocked for the guard, but Derek's desperate voice stopped me. "Wait, Bradley, wait. I never meant for any of this. It just spiraled. The gambling, the drinking, the pressure. There's always a reason, Derek, never an excuse." I turned back to face him. "You asked why I'm here because despite everything you're still my daughter's husband. That ends soon, but it meant something once. This deal is my last gift to what you used to be, before you let greed and pride consume you." "I loved her," he whispered. "I really did love her." "No," I said quietly. "You loved what she represented. Status security acceptance. You loved what she could do for you. That's not the same thing." The guard opened the door. As I left, Derek called out one more time. "What you did to me, setting me up like that. How is that any different? You manipulated everything." I paused in the doorway. "The difference is I did it to protect someone I love. You did it to destroy her. Think about that while you're deciding on the plea." The morning sun felt harsh after the jail's fluorescent lights. I sat in my truck for a moment, letting the adrenaline fade. 35 years of facing down criminals, and it never got easier looking into the eyes of someone who'd chosen evil over good. My phone buzzed. Sarah texting from the house. "Tommy's here with more information. You need to see this." I drove home to find Tom Morrison in my kitchen laptop open, looking grim. Sarah sat across from him, pale but composed. "What now?" I asked, pouring coffee with hands that only shook a little. "The Kozlovs," Tom said. "They're not happy about Derek being in custody. Means their money is locked up in legal proceedings. They've put a price on him." Inside, I sat down hard. "They want him hit in jail. 50,000 to whoever makes it happen. Word's already spreading through the system." Tom turned the laptop toward me, showing intercepted communications. "He's not safe in general population." "Good," Sarah said flatly, then caught herself. No, I don't mean that. I don't want him dead. I just want him gone." I was already reaching for my phone. "I still have contacts at the Federal Detention Center. We can get him moved to protective custody." "Why?" Sarah's voice carried years of suppressed anger. "Why protect him after everything?" "Because that's what separates us from him," I said, dialing. "We follow the law. We seek justice, not vengeance. Besides, I want him alive to face trial. Death is too easy an escape." The next few hours were a blur of phone calls and favors cashed in. By noon, Derek had been transferred to federal custody and placed in solitary for his own protection. The Kozlovs would have to wait for their money like everyone else. That afternoon, Patricia Hutchinson arrived at my door uninvited. Gary's soon-to-be ex-wife looked like she'd aged 10 years overnight, her perfect facade cracked beyond repair. "I need to talk to you," she said, clutching a designer purse like a lifeline. "About Derek. About what's going to happen." I let her in, noting Sarah's sharp intake of breath from the living room. The two women stared at each other, the wife and the mistress both victims of Derek's manipulation in different ways. "I'm sorry," Patricia said to Sarah. "I know that means nothing, but I'm sorry. I was lonely and he was charming, and I made terrible choices." Sarah studied her for a long moment. "Did you really discuss killing your husband?" Patricia's composure finally shattered. "It was Derek's idea. He kept saying Gary was dangerous, that he'd hurt me when he found out. Said it was self-defense, preventative. I was scared and drunk and—" She trailed off, recognizing the weakness of her excuses. "The recordings suggest otherwise," I said carefully. "They suggest you were the instigator." "I know how they sound. But you have to understand, Derek had a way of making you think his ideas were yours. He'd plant seeds, water them with fear and alcohol, then act surprised when they bloomed. She looked directly at me. I'm not saying I'm innocent. I'm saying he's not the victim he'll pretend to be at trial. Are you willing to testify to that? Yes. My lawyer says cooperation might keep me out of prison. Just probation and house arrest. She laughed bitterly. House arrest in the home Gary's letting me keep. Fitting punishment, I suppose. After she left, Sarah and I processed what we'd learned. Derek, the master manipulator, playing everyone against each other, always positioning himself as the wronged party. It was a pattern I'd seen before in sociopaths, but knowing the type didn't make it easier to accept. She's right about one thing, Sarah said. He did make you think his ideas were yours. I can see it now looking back. How many of my decisions were really his suggestions repeated until I believed them? All abusers do that. It's about control. I pulled out my old case files showing her patterns from past domestic violence prosecutions. See same playbook, different players? Isolation, gaslighting, financial control, escalating violence. Derek's not special. He's depressingly common. That evening, the story broke on local news. Investment analyst arrested in murder-for-hire plot. Derek's professionally shot headshot filled the screen, while reporters breathlessly detailed the charges. My name stayed out of it, but Austin's gossip network was already filling in the blanks. My phone rang constantly, reporters wanting statements, colleagues offering support clients of Derek's seeking information about their investments. I let them all go to voicemail, except one. Bradley. Derek's mother sounded fragile old. I saw the news. Is it true, all of it? I'm afraid so, Patricia. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, be honest. Could I have prevented this if I'd been a better mother, made him face consequences when he was young? I chose my words carefully. We all make choices, Patricia. Derek made his. You can't take responsibility for that. Can't I? She sighed. I'm selling the house, moving back to Ohio near my sister. I can't stay here, can't face the shame. But Bradley, thank you. For protecting Sarah. For being the parent I should have been. After we hung up, I sat in my study surrounded by evidence boxes and legal briefs. Tomorrow would bring more revelations, more hearings, more steps toward justice. But tonight was for reflection. Derek would wake tomorrow in solitary confinement, finally facing a situation he couldn't lie, charm, or buy his way out of. The federal charges alone carried 20 years minimum, and Texas didn't look kindly on domestic violence. He'd grow old in a cage, his youth and potential wasted on greed and narcissism. But Sarah would wake free. Free to rebuild her career, reconnect with friends, find someone who'd love her instead of using her. Free to become the woman she was meant to be before Derek's poison clouded her judgment. The news ended with Derek's booking, photo hollow eyes, bruised face from resisting arrest, all swagger gone. He looked exactly like what he was, a small man who'd played at being big until reality came calling. I raised my coffee mug in a mock toast to the image. Servants must obey. I quoted his words back to the screen. But judges render verdicts, and yours is coming, Derek. Count on it. Tomorrow, the legal machinery would continue grinding toward justice. Tonight, my daughter was safe, my conscience was clear, and Derek Marshall was learning what happened when you mistook mercy for weakness. The morning after had come for him. For us, it was a new beginning. 6 months later, spring had returned to Austin with an explosion of bluebonnets along Highway 290. I stood on the banks of Lake Travis, teaching my grandson how to hold a fishing rod. Little Bradley James, barely 8 weeks old, gurgled happily in his carrier, while I demonstrated the proper casting technique. See, you've got to be patient, I told him, knowing he wouldn't understand the words but believing in the power of early lessons. The fish will come when they're ready. Can't rush good things. Sarah laughed from her seat on the dock, looking healthier than she had in years. The hollow cheeks had filled out, the nervous habits disappeared, and her smile reached her eyes again. Dad, he can't even hold his own head up yet. Never too early to learn patience. I countered, reeling in my line. Besides, your mother and I had you out here when you were his age. Family tradition. Speaking of family traditions, Sarah said, her tone carefully casual. I wanted you to meet someone, if that's okay. I'd been expecting this for weeks, noticing the subtle changes in her routine, the extra care with her appearance, the mysterious phone calls that left her smiling. The pediatrician from the hospital. Her eyes widened. How did you... 35 years of investigation work, remember. I set down the rod, giving her my full attention. Dr. Michael Harrison, 37, divorced, 2 kids who spend weekends with him. Coaches Little League volunteers at the food bank, drives a sensible Honda that's paid off. Dad? Kid, did you run a background check on him? Just public records. I said, not mentioning Tom's more thorough investigation. He seems solid, Sarah. More importantly, he makes you smile like that. She blushed, looking younger than her 35 years. He wants to meet you. Maybe dinner next week, somewhere public, no pressure. He knows about everything. The trial, Derek, all of it. Didn't scare him off. Then I definitely want to meet him. The trial had been a media sensation, though we'd managed to keep Sarah mostly out of it. Derek had eventually taken the plea deal, 23 years, with possibility of parole in 15. Patricia Hutchinson got 5 years probation for conspiracy, though her social life was effectively over. Gary had already remarried a kindergarten teacher who appreciated his protective nature. Derek's mother had sent one letter before disappearing into Ohio's anonymity. She'd thanked me for forcing her to stop enabling her son, said she was in therapy, learning to break generations of toxic patterns. I hoped she found peace. Mr. Campbell. A voice called from the walking trail. Jennifer approached, pushing a jogging stroller. Sarah said you'd be out here? The reunion of Sarah's friend group had been one of the best outcomes. Jennifer visited weekly, Rachel had moved back to Austin, and a dozen other relationships Derek had poisoned were slowly healing. Sarah was even back at work, her old firm welcoming her with a promotion to make up for lost time. Jenny's helping me plan BJ's first birthday party. Sarah said, using the nickname we'd adopted for Bradley James. Nothing huge, just family and close friends. Speaking of family, I said carefully, there's something we need to discuss. Sarah's expression grew wary. If this is about Derek writing letters from prison. No, nothing like that. I pulled out an envelope from my tackle box. It's about your mother's trust, the one she set up for her grandchildren before she passed. Sarah took the envelope with shaking hands. Inside were documents showing a trust worth $2.3 million carefully invested and grown over the years since Margaret's death. Mom did this. She always planned ahead. I said, remembering my wife's determination during her final months. She knew she wouldn't see her grandchildren, but she wanted to provide for them. With Derek's conviction, he has no claim to any of it. It's all for BJ and any future siblings. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she read her mother's letter preserved all these years for this moment. Jennifer tactfully excused herself, giving us privacy for the family moment. She says she's proud of me, Sarah whispered. How could she know she'd be proud when she wrote this? Because she knew who you were at heart, strong, kind, resilient. Derek couldn't change that, just hide it for a while. I sat beside her, my arm around her shoulders. She'd be even prouder seeing you now. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun dance on the water. Baby BJ started fussing, and Sarah lifted him expertly, the maternal instincts Derek had mocked now flowing naturally. I testified at a domestic violence shelter last week, she said suddenly, about recognizing abuse patterns, seeking help rebuilding after escape. The counselor said I helped 3 women decide to leave their situations. That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'm thinking about doing more, maybe getting certified as a counselor myself eventually, Turn this mess into something meaningful." She looked at me with Margaret's determination. "What do you think?" "I think you'll help more people than you know." A boat passed in the distance, weekend fishermen enjoying the warming weather. One waved, and I recognized Gary Hutchinson with his new wife, both looking content. He'd become an unlikely friend, bonded by our shared experience of Derek's destruction. We fished together monthly, now rarely talking about the past, focused on moving forward. "Dad!" Sarah's voice pulled me back. "Do you ever regret it? The whole elaborate trap, the public humiliation, sending him to prison for basically life." I considered the question seriously. "I regret it was necessary. I regret not seeing through him sooner. But protecting you, ensuring he faced justice." "No, Sarah. That's what fathers do. Even when the father is pushing 70. Especially then." I laughed. "We've got experience on our side. Plus, retirement is boring, without the occasional criminal conspiracy to unravel." "Please tell me you're joking." "Mostly." I started packing up the fishing gear. Though Tom did mention something about a financial advisor targeting elderly clients. "Dad, no. You're supposed to be enjoying retirement, not playing vigilante." "Who said anything about vigilante work? I'm just consulting. Helping the authorities recognize patterns. Using my experience for good." She shook her head but smiled. "Once a prosecutor, always a prosecutor." "Once a father, always a father," I corrected. "That's the job that matters most." We walked back to my truck, 3 generations of Campbells enjoying the Texas spring. Derek was serving his time in federal prison in Beaumont, reports, indicating he'd found religion and was teaching literacy to other inmates. I hoped it was genuine change, not another manipulation. Everyone deserved redemption if they truly sought it. Sarah had filed the final divorce papers last month, officially ending the marriage that had nearly destroyed her. She'd taken back her maiden name, another step in reclaiming her identity. The house in Westlake had sold, the proceeds going to pay Derek's victims and settle his debts. Justice with restitution, the best kind. "Same time next week?" I asked as we loaded the truck. "BJ needs to see his first fish caught. It's a date, and Dad maybe invite Dr. Harrison. Let them meet on neutral ground." "Already planning on it," I admitted. "Tom's reports aside, I need to see how he handles a fishing rod. Tells you everything about a man's character." "You're impossible." Sarah laughed but hugged me tight. "And I love you for it." As we drove away, I caught sight of our reflection in the rearview mirror, grandfather, daughter, and grandson rebuilt stronger than before. Derek had called me a servant that violent Sunday night, spitting the word like venom. He'd been wrong, of course, but also unknowingly right. I was a servant of justice, of family, of the principles that separated civilization from chaos. I'd served those ideals for 35 years in courtrooms, and I'd serve them until my last breath, protecting those I loved. The difference between Derek and me wasn't about power or position. It was about understanding what strength really meant. He thought it meant domination, control, never showing weakness. But real strength was teaching your grandson patience, while your daughter healed. Real strength was building others up instead of tearing them down. Real strength was knowing when to be a silent wolf and when to let the silence end. That night, as I sat on my porch watching the stars appear over Lake Travis, I thought about Margaret. Wondered what she'd make of everything that had happened. In my heart, I knew she'd approve. Not of the violence or the pain, but of the protection, the justice, the second chance her daughter had earned. "We did it, Maggie," I whispered to the night sky. "Our little girl's going to be just fine." A shooting star streaked across the darkness, and I chose to take it as agreement. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to serve and protect. But tonight my family was safe. Justice had been served, and somewhere in federal prison, a man who'd mistaken kindness for weakness was learning that actions have consequences. It was enough, more than enough. It was everything. What would you do if someone you trusted turned out to be a master manipulator? Have you ever had to protect someone you love from a toxic relationship? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more tales of justice and redemption. Share this with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to stand up to a bully, no matter how powerful they seem. Thank you for joining me on this journey. And remember, true strength isn't about dominance. It's about protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Until next time, stay strong and keep fighting the good fight.